What we want to do today is to share with you some findings from three local authority evaluations, three evaluations that we undertook in local authorities of the attachment aware schools programme, which originated with Bath Spa University and Bath and North East Somerset, which is one of the authorities we worked with. And the key messages are on the table somewhere in front of you from that evaluation. And from Kate Cairns Associates, who have done a lot of training materials in this area. But the purpose today is not about those evaluations. The purpose is to use those findings to generate discussion and thinking amongst yourselves, and thinking of ways forward in terms of what this means for your work and what you might do, and also to make clear that Oxfordshire, some of you are from Oxfordshire but not everyone, has signed up to the Alex Timpson programme on attachment and trauma in schools, which I'll say a little bit more about at the end. But there's a newsletter, that looks like that on your table about that programme. And that's been running, recruiting schools and local authorities for a year now, has another 4 years to go. I will hand over to Nigel at the end for the discussion of this group moving forward. So I'll hand over to Nigel now, and he'll tell you a little bit about the findings from the evaluation.
As Judy explained a bit, this is set up as a knowledge exchange. We call it a workshop, so we want to do some work, I'm afraid. But knowledge exchange funding for this came from the university in relation to the findings that we had. And the purpose of that is really for us to sort of show you some of the things we were finding out about, and for you to be able to think about the relevance of that for you, but also that helps us going forward with whatever else we do next. So as Judy identified, the work on the Alex Timpson programme is underway, and therefore that's really helpful for us to think about the ways in which that can be fine-tuned in different kinds of ways to be really effective. So that's really what today's about. So we'll present what we found out from the three evaluations overall. We'll then ask you to kind of discuss those findings in different kinds of ways and just feed back to that on us. What we're also doing, as you may have noticed, is filming, and they're filming us rather than you, and the presentation. And then we're also going to use that as a blog to actually circulate it as well through our contacts to get other kinds of feedback on it. And then at the end, what we wanted to do, particularly to kind of see how these ideas, these perhaps seeds that we were able to sow today actually played out in practice, was to create a smaller group of a handful of you who were prepared to do that, to take action in a different kind of way. But I'll explain that at the end. So this is really not about us going, da-da, we found this stuff, isn't it wonderful? It's about us going, look, we've found some things out that are kind of interesting and unusual. What can you do with that, and what can you tell us about how we can make progress with that in other kinds of ways? So, that really is about trying to improve the outcomes, attainment and outcome and lives of these particular kinds of young people. So just by way of background, just to be clear about kind of who we are in this, you've come to the Department of Education. This project's run by the Rees Centre, which aims to identify what works to improve the outcomes and life chances of looked after children and young people. So that's its aim and purposes. It runs as a research centre here within this department, has a number of materials. The work so far has included a whole range of different kinds of projects, not just about education, although it's in the Department of Education. So there's a range of other things as well. Caitlin's here on a doctoral student, I can't see whether she's right there, who's doing work on unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, particularly in schools. So different kinds of projects and different kinds of people in different kinds of ways. And we talked about the role in education linked to attainment, and particularly this work around attachment. So just broadly to identify what kinds of children we're focusing on here, is looked after children who have particularly unstable lives, unstable school lives, twice as likely to be permanently excluded from school. Their primary carers are often ill-equipped to support their schooling, even if they're able to get into schooling. That may be very difficult. They have a whole range of different kinds of needs, emotional needs, mental needs, physical needs, which impact on their learning in different kinds of ways. Their concerns, anxieties, worries about those kinds of things lead to a low engagement and to low attainment. And against the sort of benchmark GCSE figures, they're typically getting about 14% of what used to be the 5 A's to C's, as against 56%. So that's the kind of educational outcomes of attainment that is challenging for them as a group. A diagnosis of that is that these struggles are seen as attachment issues. I mean, that's a step forward in diagnosing what those issues are, and that's seen as being helpful in schools. That's seen as being a solution to a lot of those issues in schools. And just, I'm not sure how much people know about attachment theory. I don't come at this as a psychologist who specialises in attachment. I come at this as someone who's very interested in the way schools engage with research, use research, how they mobilise that in their practices to improve what they do. Essentially, it's based on the notion of trauma in early years, sort of classic psychological notion that what happens early on in your life affects what happens later, which is sort of obvious in some ways, but actually quite hard to unpick in others. So it's about all those kinds of things that cause problems: pre-birth experience, substance abuse, separation and loss later on, chronic unrelieved pain, being abused, being witnesses to abuse, neglect, unpredictability. Those kinds of issues play into then and are exacerbated by moving in and out of care, about medical issues which aren't or aren't diagnosed, and perhaps those issues not being understood particularly well. So the argument is that this plays into two kinds of reactions: secure reactions and insecure reactions as to a basic binary, and then more complicated models of the kinds of insecurity that these young people might have, depending on the particular kinds of diagnosis. So I'm certainly not going to go all through all this. I think what's important about it is this is the kind of lens that's being presented to teachers and in schools to identify where we think, what we think are the causes of young people's issues and under-attainment in schools. These are the kinds of ways they're responding to that. And I would say, this itself is contested within attachment theory. To what extent are these labels appropriate? To what extent do they need to be fine-tuned in themselves? And you can see that movement from sort of secure, insecure into more complicated modelling of what we think insecurity is, how it might look, how it might take shape, how it might express itself. So that's the kind of background in terms of that kind of theory. In terms of taking it into schools, on the one hand, teachers don't feel equipped to tackle these kinds of issues. These are seems to be quite a big kind of psychological diagnosis as to what's wrong, but also teachers often feel kind of insecure about what they might do around that. And therefore what's needed is to bridge the worlds of education and psychology. How is it that people who work in practice in schools, in school settings, can make sense of, at one level, these quite complex psychological theories as to what's going on? There's a bridge to be crossed there in different kinds of ways. And it's the effectiveness of that bridge, really, which is what's at stake. And part of the negativity around that is, if you talk to teachers about what research is or theory is, they're often quite negative. They don't really like the idea of being told what to do by outsiders in different kinds of ways. They're often cautious of that. They're often cautious of what this thing is that other people are imposing on them. And they often prefer to rely on professional expertise in practice. They stick with what they know. They stick with what's worked for them. They build up their own kinds of models as to what's going on. And that's how a lot of teachers, get through the school day, make all those micro judgments that they've got to make in a class of 30 when everyone's doing different things. That's a complicated process. So if you give them something else to think about as well, that's got to have traction within their professional expertise and their normal practice. That's got to make sense within that particular setting. And that's also got to play into the organisational culture of schools. That research has not just got to fit for that teacher, it's got to fit within that wider educational setting with what else is going on in that institution. There's a lot of research on teen sleep that suggests that actually it would be more helpful for teenagers if their school day started at about 11 o'clock and finished at about 6 or 7 o'clock. Is it going to happen? No, because for all sorts of reasons, schools aren't going to shift secondary schooling to be earlier than primary schooling. That's just something that's not going to happen. So there are issues about what you find and actually whether that's ultimately practical in a school setting, in a school situation. So this is not just a thing of like, how do we apply attachment? It's also, there's this kind of, what do we do with theories? If we say it's attachment theory, what happens if you come up with a theory and whack it into schools? How does it flow into the school culture? How do people access it? What are the barriers to it being implemented particularly effectively? So we were involved in these 3 evaluations of a project run by Kate Cairns Associates, which was training teachers up in these three particular local authorities. So as Judy identified, initially it was Bath and North East Somerset was first we worked in. We then worked in Leicestershire and Stoke-on-Trent as well. And they were recruiting schools. They did the training in different kinds of ways. That was one of the comparisons between them. Bath and North East Somerset got 2 people from each school to 1 central training, and then they went on it and worked on it in their schools. Leicestershire and Stoke-on-Trent had a different model whereby actually the training was bespoke in each of the schools, and there were advantages and disadvantages to both. The first was very centralised, very coordinated, but then perhaps didn't necessarily get traction in particular schools. The second one really picked off in the schools that had chosen it, but then it was more difficult elsewhere. So even at that level, there were just variations within what happened. We were interested in 3 broad things: the attainment and attendance of looked after children in those settings. Can we make some judgments about that? How have the participants' professional repertoire, confidence and practices changed? Were teachers and anyone working in the school, we were interested also in not just teachers but school leaders as well as teaching assistants as well as the school caretaker, a whole range of people who might be involved. Had their behaviours, did they think more confidently about what was happening in different kinds of ways? And then thirdly, that question about organisational cultures. What was happening organisationally within schools? What were the sort of more strategic decisions about what happens that implemented this? And so we came up with some methodology stuff, as we do. So a mixed methods approach. We did a kind of pre and post the intervention design, quite soft really in terms of the data we drew, we used, because we were just using school data that was there. It was quite ecological in terms of that. We weren't imposing any new kind of tests on these particular pupils. We were just kind of drawing on that. We were surveying the teachers as well. So we did a large quantitative survey across all teachers involved, and then we did a few schools in more detail in each of those areas. So kind of usually about 4 case study schools within each of the local authorities, just to kind of get under the skin of what was happening within those particular organisations. So in terms of the overall numbers, you can see Bath and North East Somerset, 8 primary schools, 6 secondaries, 2 were special schools, 16 schools altogether, or teachers from 16 schools altogether in the big surveys. Leicestershire, more schools overall, more schools were involved, 18 primary schools, although they have a infant and junior distinction there. 3 secondaries involved in that, 3 special schools as well, so 24 in total. Stoke-on-Trent, obviously you can see numbers down a little bit. But a reasonable sample overall, round about kind of 40 schools in total involved in what we're trying to talk through today. And that was a range of teachers in each of those schools, so I think between about 250 and 300 teachers altogether. in terms of attendance and attainment, it would be wonderful to say, oh yes, it was all wonderful and they all did much better and all the rest of it. The issue was this was a period when actually the way schools do their assessment and reporting was changing. SATs were changing in primary schools, the way that was recorded was changing. GCSEs were changing in secondary schools. The way attendance and exclusion was also being reported in different kinds of ways. So it was actually difficult to pull that through. And it was also quite clear that actually schools, what they were saying was schools were saying to us, we think it's making a difference, but it didn't necessarily show through straight away. So actually overall, there was things didn't seem to be getting worse, which was something. It was hard to really say that this was particularly of itself on the quantitative data like this, that these were the things were deliberate for definitely making it better. But you know, if you think the training happens, by the time that embeds itself in young people's behaviour, by the time that comes through in the way they perform in kind of formalised tests or whatever, that's a different process that's going to take quite a long time to really factor in. So in terms of that, a kind of complicated picture overall. But you know, reasonably positive in interesting kinds of ways. If we look at what people said about it, some of the more qualitative findings, that was kind of quite thought-provoking, really, in various ways. So, on the surveys, 73% felt more confident in dealing with looked after children, which I think was an important, significant finding overall. And various things were coming through from that. The first obvious thing was the notion of whole staff coherence in terms of this, so that it wasn't just the teaching staff, it was all the staff. And one of the interesting things was about the involvement of what one might call the dinner ladies, but the catering staff, and lunchtimes was particularly important because that's one of those odd kind of liminal times when certain kinds of behaviour are expected, but it's not really clear what they are. What are the rules when you are queuing in for your lunch at a canteen at school? How should you behave? How shouldn't you behave? And how do the people who are in control of that space treat you, behave towards you? What are the sort of sanctions that they can use or not use? So what was important there was this notion of all staff within schools being involved, and that a whole school approach was really significant in this. One of the other things that came through was actually, which was quite interesting, was a designated teacher in one school saying, actually staff need to realise that attachment theory is not itself fixed. That is a theory which is under development, and that this is the best model we have at the moment. So she said, it's helping the staff to even understand, as the theories develop, understanding that firstly they're theoretical constructs to help us explain what we see, and that theory might not be the final piece. It's an ongoing process to helping staff understand that. You couldn't see this as a sort of final solution, as a quick fix. You had to understand that the theory itself was itself, being refined and developed, and that there were arguments within it, particularly around whether it was important or it was good for a child to become particularly attached to one teacher or one significant adult or not. Should they become attached to one person, but then when they moved classes at the end of the year, they were going to have to break that attachment and start again? Or should you keep it at a distance all the time, no matter how hard that was? So, people were positioning themselves along that on that as a spectrum within attachment theory. So that was important in terms of the kind of language and strategies. The next was how people found that they had new expertise, the kinds of expertise they felt had developed, as ways of dealing with this. So for one teacher said, I wasn't aware of the different types of attachment issues, and it helped me to realise that children may have more barriers to learning. This for her was a significant way of becoming aware of the variety of kinds of things. For her, the lens was helpful in terms of reading the situation, in terms of a typology of what was going on in the classroom that she could read in particular ways. Then others were able to pinpoint particular things. I was able to identify children where emotional competency may be an issue and use different strategies to help them access, engage with their learning. So for this teacher, you know, that she could use it diagnostically in different kinds of ways, as you might expect. Or particular moments. I realised at the start of each lesson is new. The key language I use with these students is very important to provide reassurance and build resilience so they can succeed. So, you know, a critical moment, that first opening of the lesson, how you greet children when they come in, was really, really vital. And she picked that up from the training, that there was professionally for her to embody attachment theory in her teaching. She had to really kind of focus on that particular moment. You know, if you treated them badly then it was all going to kick off and, you know, you were going to be struggling for the rest of the lesson as well. The next couple of slides are about organisational structures and responses. What are the kinds of things that happen that get into place that make this kind of normal and doable? And two examples are just given here. One is that things became a routine in different kinds of ways. And this particular example of the researcher asked a particular pupil, primary school pupil, and this was a primary school pupil whose both his parents were drug addicts. His mother in particular was a heroin addict, and he was being fostered by his grandparents, by one of his sets of grandparents, who, you know, as a formal arrangement. So in response to a question, anything in particular that stops you working? He says, I always think of my mum when she's not there. Now that wasn't the question. The question was about what stops you working. His answer is, I always think of my mum when she's not there. I start scribbling on my book. So for him, you know, that's the sort of issue of anxiety, just sort of letting his concerns flood out. So, right, is that when you go and see Miss Smith, the teaching assistant? She takes me out of class for a bit. She's a nice woman. I stay outside for a bit. So one of this is quite banal. You know, yeah, da-da-da-da, he starts scribbling. Teaching assistant comes over and says, come on, Joe, let's go outside. Okay. Now, what's interesting, I think, about it is the school has got this routine, which is normal. This pupil can recognise there is a routine in place that happens when he starts behaving in a particular way. He knows that someone notices this happening. That's, you know, he can see that someone comes and help him. And also he recognises it in himself. He recognises that actually what stops him working is when he starts thinking about his mother. So he's actually also, in terms of his own, you know, his kind of emotional intelligence around this emotion coaching aspect of it, he's starting to recognise the symptoms in himself as to what happens. But also because the structures and the routines are there for him to be able to put that into place. And that gives him the security that he needs. So that's one example of it. The other example was actually a kind of very physical one about having specific safe places, which came through a lot of the schools. And teachers recognise this. So being given time and space in which to explain their feelings in a calm, safe place. That notion of a place that pupils could go to was really important. Someone else identified the refurbishment of the withdrawal space in the school as being a really important catalyst. Actually having a place where, you know, pupils like this could go to, that was seen as being where you could go to and access that kind of thing. One of the schools I visited actually had they had a lot of pets in the kind of learning support room. So there was like an iguana and guinea pigs and hamsters and all sorts of things. And also, you know, kind of quite troubled pupils would come in and then they'd be fine kind of looking after the animals. That was kind of part of creating a particular safe space. So those were kind of those two aspects of it. The two on the left are also more positive, which is about actually wider issues of pastoral support, not just pupils, but for one, when I say infant teacher, I don't mean the teacher that high, I mean, you know, obviously teacher of infants. Whole school development of mental health and well-being of all in the school staff and pupils. You know, actually this was, in some ways, this was something which was also applicable to the adults in the school, which was quite thought-provoking. The second example below is that attachment theory was actually used quite systematically in wider decision-making about in which particular groups you would place students the following year. So you know, we've been changing and looking at class groups for this next year. We've been very careful about where we put people. We've looked at the progress they've made with some students with attachment disorders and being mindful where they're going to be and who they're going to be with. So this became a kind of, for school leadership, this became a catalyst in making those kinds of decisions as to what was going on. The other issue was about kind of conflicts, actually, was about where teachers perceive barriers in terms of enacting and embodying attachment kind of principles, which is this issue particularly about conflict between behaviour management systems in schools and these kinds of processes. So for this secondary school teacher, I do feel that it does become a bit difficult because it feels like we're running parallel rules. And I'll give you an example. One student has an attachment disorder. She's sworn at me. She's used bad language with me. I don't want to get out of your class. You can't do anything. And I do feel then that other students are looking at this and thinking, well, she can get away with it. So this teacher's, state of anxiety. On the one stand, I'm supposed to, I've got to kind of keep order and kind of classroom management needs to be kind of secure. On the other hand, I've got to respond to this particular student in a particular way. So there's a puzzle for her and a puzzle more widely for the school as to, in a sense, it's the sort of top trumps, which set of rules are the ones that are going to win out in the end in that situation. And you can see that if that's not thought through at a kind of leadership level, then that's kind of problematic. Kind of conclusions, really. Firstly, in terms of what we've talked through in terms of issues around attachment, whole staff training is clearly important in this. The involvement of the whole school community is important, with opportunities to bring the whole school together, and the most successful examples were of that. And that's often the benefit of having the in-school bespoke training, rather perhaps than the centralised training which is then dissipated outwards, that you can get everyone in the school together. You also need senior leader commitments, including resource allocation to this in terms of time and money and space as well. That was important in the engagement and impact of the programme. So those things may be different. In terms of kind of how do we think about this more generally, in terms of if there are some other ideas that we think are important, if there's some other kinds of findings from aspects of psychology or other aspects of research which we need to embed into schools. What are the wider lessons that we can learn from this? Particularly when attachment theory is not part of pedagogical expertise. It doesn't help you teach literacy better. It won't get kids better at maths in itself. It's not a strategy for those things. But arguably what it does do is speak in some way to the practical domain of teachers' expertise, and it's about accessing that that's particularly important. And the CPD provided research for a different kind of professional domain, which didn't kind of ignore teachers' own professional capacities, but actually played into it really effectively. And they could make sense of it in their own kinds of ways. That's a kind of whistle-stop tour of where we were up to. What we really hoped you would be able to do now on your tables is to just think through or kind of write up some of the three really things about that. One is that the implications of what we've said for practice, for your practice in different kinds of ways.